Oh, and thank you for the sponsorship. This is wonderful at the library, and thank you from Books by the Sea. This is another Sally, so you're in the hands of the good people here. And I also have to pay tribute to Craigville people coming, including the next door neighbors. Boy, this is, one might have thought you'd gotten enough of us over the years. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and I realize that the three of you in the front have heard this before. You may hear it. I'm sorry, I may repeat myself a little bit. But I'd like to add also that I have my Cape Cod credentials in that I lived on the Cape from 1957 to 64, and I graduated from Nauset Regional. So I've both been a migrating bird and I've lived here, though I'm well aware that you can never be a true native without being born here. And this is, of course, the place I'm writing about. And I think every memoir of any kind is really, in a sense, two stories, and this book is that way. That's the place, which is the Buffington family cottage, 63 Ocean Avenue in Craigville. And next slide. I'm not getting the next slide. Is it?
It always happens. Never fails.
Never fails. And we rehearsed it too.
We've done this.
Okay, and the other part of it is, of course, the person in the place like this, me. We got a major laugh when back in the old days, it was the Cape Cod Standard Times, and this florid headline, "Betrothal Revealed." Everybody thought that was pretty good. That's who I was when I came in. I had just graduated from the New England Conservatory of Music. And I had met Andy and we'd gotten engaged rather quickly. And I didn't expect that there was more than the family to meet. Or you might say there was another member of the family I had to meet, and that was the cottage. So I'll read a little of what I've said here because it explains it pretty well. January 28th, 1968. I'd been engaged barely 24 hours when Andy said, "Now we've got to go to Craigville." I had thought we were simply on our way back to Boston after the weekend with my parents. Andy had told me about Craigville, but I hadn't expected to meet the place so soon. I realized that it was an honored and vital member of the family. And maybe as I read about the house, you might like to see it. What Andy called Craigville turned out to be a big old weathered shingled house, sort of planted on a hillside, surrounded by other dowager summer cottages. The place was shut up for winter in what I would learn was typical Buffington fashion. Careful, hard work had been done. All the furnishings were covered in old sheets. The water and the power were shut off, the screens and the curtains taken down. The place slumbered in a degree of desolation that varied on the comical. The discolored slab of plywood protected the front door. The bare branches, dry leaves, and the bleached out grass added to a very forlorn impression. But however stripped and wintry it looked, I saw the cottage with summer eyes, pretty much really like this. I was high as a kite and I was in love, and so was Andy. And also I had lived on the Cape, so I knew the magic that summer would bring here. I shivered when we stepped into the cottage. It was cold and dank, but the whole weekend had been full of contrast and transformation. The day before, Andy had proposed to me in brilliant sun on First Encounter Beach in Eastham. He chose it because he knew I loved the place. Come on in. But as a result of a lengthy cold snap, everything was frozen. What water we could see was a deep, deep blue. And over much of the beach, the wind had sculpted the sea foam into mini icebergs. They looked like meringues. Sitting next to me on one of them, Andy said, "Will you go to California with me?" I knew what he meant was, "Will you marry me?" Of course, I said yes, which came to mean over 50 years ago now, 54, that California has been our home. Every summer, we fly Pacific to Atlantic, always to Cape Cod, and then back again, migrating birds in a bi-coastal life. And we're still doing it, still taking whatever airline offers a nonstop to Boston. I'd like to add, I think it's interesting that the cottage was a kind of salvage operation when it was first put together. It didn't just exist. It had originated, believe it or not, there used to be hotels in Craigville, as you've probably heard, big old hotels. And in 1906, there was a lady named Annie Fisher. She was my husband's distant relative. They had what they called a dance pavilion, which I gather wasn't very big, but it was a room where there was dancing of a very prim style. And it got sort of deaccessioned, cut off the main hotel. Well, Aunt Annie saw the opportunity, and that room became our living room and dining room in the house. It was rolled on logs down a hill and up onto the little hillside that became our cottage, and then enlarged around to make this place. And I've always thought talk about making use of what was on hand. So here I am today, and I'd like to tell you a little about this house, which unfortunately has been bought and remodeled in the process. When I came into it, I married in, you have rose-colored glasses when you're first married. I didn't foresee that it might change me. I just thought it was a lovely place to be. I was an only child, and being at the Buffingtons, a large family, it seemed like a party every night, being at the dinner table. Later, it took me some getting used to. This is Andy and me the day we were married. And of course, I was marrying into, there must be many of them here in Osterville, all over the Cape, the old family summer place. And in this picture, Andy is the boy being held on his grandmother's lap there. And Jim Buffington is over on the left, Peter on the extreme right. This is, we took many family pictures on the front porch. And I'll show you going next slide. These are my in-laws, Jim and Lois Buffington, who really made that house what we know it. They bought it in 1938. Andy hadn't even been born yet. And they developed it, went every summer. It was the family place. But maybe we should say before we go further, okay, it's family history. There's family history. Why should you be interested in it? So many family homes are on Cape Cod. Places become very important in your life. I'm sure my Craigville friends here know what I mean. But what I think this house became was what I call a place of the heart. And people have them, whether they're on Cape Cod. People have places like that. I bet everybody in this room could tell me one, whether it's Cape Cod or by now, talking about my book, I have heard about places of the heart all over New England, Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota. I was recently on Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. the Pacific coast. I even was fascinated that someone spoke to me, said her place of the heart was camping in the Sierras the first year she was married with her husband, that it was just the atmosphere there among the trees, camping, was her place of the heart that she thinks back to and remembers. So I was very much in Andy's place of the heart. I also had to get used to the family. And part of a memoir, in a sense, is what I was doing. How do you keep your sense of self in this mix that you've married into? This compound of home, house, family. We've all encountered it in one way or another. At first, it was not easy. For me, it was my mother-in-law, who was a wonderful woman and not an easy one. I learned a lot from her. You might say, the old phrase, she ran a tight ship. She would probably say she had to. She was in charge, making the place run. And very often in the old tradition, her husband was away all summer. So there she was with 3 kids and their friends and hangers-on. She had to keep order. It wasn't easy to be her daughter-in-law at times. However, among other things, she cooked magnificently. We got used to wonderful meals. She was famous, and rightly so, for blueberry pie from the wild blueberries that grew around the cottage. Hello, come in. Hi, hi, Pam. How are you?
How are you?
Nice to see you. Another Craigvilleite and used to the drill. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. Well, it's wonderful you're here. Thank you. Well, I'm speaking about, of course, the cottage and speaking how I came into it and how cottages, and you own one of them too. The family cottage, the summer place, is a great, let's call it little society in itself, excuse me. And one of the ways for me to come in was cooking. I don't make the blueberry pies that Mom did. I don't think I could manage it. I do make blueberry muffins, and I did a lot. And having breakfast out on the porch, that was a very important thing. And just having lots of family parties. These are dear friends of ours. In fact, Kathy on the right there, next to Andy, I'll see on Wednesday. And the sociability of the place was just grand and so much fun. However, to write a book like this, which I never envisioned for many years, where does this come from? I didn't just write it in a burst. So I'd like to read a little bit. I think Barbara and Rick have perhaps heard this one before, and I apologize for the repeat, but a chapter called Awake in the Night, which for me was a reality at Craigville. You'd get so busy and stirred up by the day's events, you couldn't sleep, or at times in the day. How do you keep track of this wonderful existence you're living? And this first line is just what we're living with. A humid August night, 3 a.m. Hardly a sound outdoors or indoors. The leaves hang limp. The birds and the usual humming insects are enervated into silence. Every bed in the cottage is occupied. Andy and I always sleep in the buff. That night, we couldn't have imagined anything else. Each of us just lay flung out. He was zonked out, but my mind was rushing around counting people, bedroom by bedroom. Oh, what do I have for breakfast? Have we got enough eggs? Who's leaving? Who's coming today? Oh, and what on earth can I serve for dinner that everyone will like or can eat? Then I drifted toward happier thoughts, how the water felt swimming this afternoon, and the glorious drive on Route 6A where the trees meet above the road in a canopy of green. I have to write. Silently, I got up, forgetting to put on a robe. I didn't need a flashlight, and I started down the stairs to the living room. You might be thinking, what was she thinking? The stillness was thick and lovely. The air was almost furry on my skin. I'd gotten about halfway when I heard a voice. That you, Sally? Peering around, I made out our friend Howard sitting on the porch in his pajamas, probably desperate for a smidgen of breeze. Startled, I froze, and reflexively crossed my arms in an X. Howard, are you okay? Do you need anything? Oh, I'm all right. I just couldn't sleep, and it's a bit cooler out here. Well, if you need a cold drink, help yourself to what's in the fridge. The light's on a string overhead right as you walk into the kitchen. And then, hoping he'd seen no more of me than legs and feet, I scampered back upstairs. I think back on that night now with only mild embarrassment. Howard probably thought, oh, somebody else is awake too. Ever since then, I put on a robe. But I envisioned myself as I must have looked. My figure white among dark shadows, sort of a buxom ghost. In the moment, I see myself as the cottage's resident spirit, maybe even Peter Pan looking for his shadow when everyone else is asleep. My shadow, whatever spiral-bound book I was using for a journal that summer. I kept it on the desk or in my guest bedroom office, if that were not being slept in, and in an unused corner of the living room. I always sensed my journal waiting for me, glowing in the dark, a rectangle whose luminescence only I could see. To write, however, I would have had to switch on a light, then sit down, probably in the bathroom, the way I'd written in motel rooms over the years. Step one, write a word or two, step forward, another word, and my pen would stride off on the smooth ground of the paper. Many times over our summers, I used the phrase, awake in the night, to describe those journal entries. I was the one noticing, who recorded what moved her, while others slept or simply lived. No matter when I wrote, and I came to write in the day too, I felt myself in a kind of night where I could enter and live in a myself when naked attention to the world with no barriers. So the spiral notebooks became what you might call my personal yearbooks. Every year I started a different one and wrote them there. And they are still in my house. I've said, if there were a fire and I had to leave, I'd grab those. Anyway, that's where it happened. I took over what had been Mom's bedroom downstairs and wrote there in the corner. And it became a wonderful escape for me. But I also, whether I wrote literally or not, use other places, and I love to cook. And Craigville has really taught me a lot about cooking. And I had a chapter called Counter Space. For me, that's the sweet spot, or was, in that cottage. There's not much to it, really, if you look carefully. It is just Formica countertop and a sink and a stove. But that's where it happened. And if I had the unusual fortune to be alone in the house, I sometimes felt I was the captain on the bridge of the ship in that place. I see Pam understands what I mean there. I got ideas. It was a beautiful place to cook. And that is really one of the sweet spots. However, I'm also out in nature. I may shock you by saying Craigville Beach is not my favorite beach. It's beautiful swimming, but I like wild beaches. This is over at Rock Harbor in Orleans. I tended for walking a beach to seek those out, or freshwater ponds, which I happen to love. And I know a lot of details about the woods around Craigville. I've been amused that this summer that trail that goes below the tabernacle, I've been walking that for years. It's not new. I almost never met anybody there and always wondered why no one paid much attention to it. And it's just beautiful out there. The house, I wrote a whole chapter about being in a tree house. This is a view from the porch. And I used to feel that I was in a tree house, particularly out in the porch. And I think you get me, I could tell. And we all loved it. My brother-in-law, Peter, hated to take down any trees because he felt the birds and the squirrels should have the main vote, which is why there were a lot of dead trees out there. And the wood impression, of course, you all know beadboard. Always felt I was in a tree house in the house. You know, you hear the trees brushing on the roof, you see the wooden ceilings, look out the window, there's the trees. And I love that feeling. The picture on the left there is the knothole that I woke up to every morning above our bed. This is how the living room looked, and this brings up one other aspect of the house. The place was full of stuff. All these things, my in-laws traveled a great deal, and some of it was before the days of Pier 1 or World Market, and they brought things back. So just at the very top right of the picture, right here, is an old native axe, I think, from New Guinea. I can't imagine the place without it. Or on the mantelpiece, the two busts, one at either end. My mother-in-law bought them somewhere in Africa. And the house was full of stuff like that. And then we all added. I wanted to particularly brighten it up, and things like tablecloths get it maybe a little more cheerful in some ways. You know, and different tastes, different people using it. So it was full of these interesting things and fun to be in. Now, sad to say, it's gone out of the family, as happens to many families on the Cape, across the country. The next generation can't or won't take it on. And it's still so much in my heart and my husband's, to the point that he won't come to Craigville. He just can't stand it, I think. It is still in our hearts. I was telling Barbara and Rick, all during 2020, I mean, when we had just signed it over, it was so gone. Here we were at home quarantining and doing what we did in 2020. I think we talked about that house every day. It just has entered into our lives, and it still lives in my mind, as you can probably tell, and not just because I've written about it, but I loved it very much. So thank you for listening, and what questions can I answer? What would people like to know?
What's your wedding date?
June 29th, 1968.
Sally, do you ever remember the story of how, and maybe you said this before we arrived, but I think it was maybe the dining room and the living room were made from the wood from the old dancing hall.
Yes.
To walk it in.
That's right. It was that was rolled up as an integral piece up on logs. As far as I can see, nobody has ever found pictures. I wish someone had photographed just that event happening. Anyway, Aunt Annie Fisher arranged for that and then had the house built around it. And we didn't change very much. I mean, we changed windows. My father-in-law had a small basement built on the back there. But by and large, the character of the house did not change, really. Yes.
I used to hang around.
Yes.
Quite a bit. Where is that exactly located. I used to play softball and baseball up in the field there.
Can somebody say it clearly where, because I can help you, but I think the Craigville people could locate you more precisely.
So you know where the baseball field is?
Yeah.
And then the marsh is west of there. Follow the marsh north. That's where their house was.
Yeah.
Overlooking the marsh.
That's right.
Back in the center.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah. And it's still a very beautiful spot, and that view of the marsh, you know, I still look at that a great deal. I still think of it mentally, and I think my husband does.
Beautiful sunsets.
Yes, oh, definitely the sunsets.
The other thing is, maybe you don't know, or you've never heard any of this, you know, up where you played baseball, they dug a septic system in. At that point, they found some Native American bones, which were then reinterred by the Native Americans. But did you ever hear of anything?
Well,
Anything like that up on that hill? That's pretty high.
no, and we did, we of course did a Title V septic to get into the glamorous history of this place. And oh, what was it? I think 2006 or so. We didn't come across anything like that. But that was when, I will say, believe it or not, that's the basis of one chapter in the book, because looking at the structure of things, walking the whole property and learning the history of the property, which Peter knew a lot, and that gave me a different appreciation of the house. And also, I think it was one day when I realized how much I loved the place. You know, the guy came with the backhoe of all the unglamorous things, you know, just chomping up the front yard and digging this huge hole. And I felt like, oh no, it hurts. And at one point he went across inadvertently cut a tree branch off. And I thought, something's broken. And then this voice said, but that's not your body. You haven't broken your ankle. But I realized I felt for this place so deeply, and that it got so exposed in that business that day.
And recently it was just dug out and replaced, so it'll be lower so they could occupy the basement level.
Oh my gosh. After all that work and that monumental thing that was put in the ground. Well, but that's how things happen. Yes. No, we didn't. Fortunately, except for the night I wrote about there, it was pretty manageable with the breezes and having all the windows open. But still, oh, there were times, I mean, we all know them, the dog days, I guess you call it a summer, when everybody's a bit irritable and it's sticky and hot.
Like today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think the nice part about that property too is you have so many trees.
Yes. And that was ironically, people would ask me from the West Coast, aren't you worried about hurricanes? Thinking of tidal surges and stuff. Our worry was more the trees and branches coming down. And one day we did have an osprey fly down on the porch roof. I suddenly saw these grand wings and wondered what it was. And I think it was a young one who was learning to fly and didn't know quite where to go yet.
Did you say the age of that cottage originally?
It was constructed, let's say brought together, 1906. Yeah, so it got 115 years, I guess I should say, which is quite a long time. This house is down. Yes.
Did you have damage from Hurricane Bob?
Yes. That one, I was looked on as having cheated. What happened was that, you see, for a while, my mother lived over in Brewster, so I would split my time between Brewster and Craigville. And I was staying with my mother during the hurricane and then scheduled to fly out the day after Hurricane Bob. So Peter and my mother-in-law and Peter's then girlfriend, Jacqueline, were at the cottage. They didn't have power for a week, I think, and a great deal of damage to clean up, a lot of branches down and stuff.
We were on the midway.
And I had sort of a funny experience. The buses were running to Logan, and my daughters and I, the kids and I got on the bus, and then the driver took a sort of Pony Express spirit to get to Logan. And we took a couple of odd turns at times. Also, the mid-cape was plowed and cleared, but Sandwich was all snarled up with trees down. And then in Logan, of course, there were all these people who had reservations for the day before. And nobody, of course, was very happy. And I got as bristly as I could, and we got on the plane and made it out. But I did, let's say I ran away from the damage.
Sally, how many years was the Sherman family neighbors of yours?
Oh, wow.
Because it was Jack's father too, right?
That's right. I didn't know the father. I knew Jack and Marty, who were there, and she was particularly a great figure to me. Certainly, I knew them a good 25 or 30 years, I think. But I'm sorry not to be more accurate. I think, well, we need Peter. He would have the dates, and I don't. I will say one of my best memories involves them, that they were the next door neighbors before Barbara and Rick. And it was my brother-in-law Peter's birthday, when his birthday is August 15th, I think. They came over one night. They said they'd bring a cake. They came through the woods, and they had sparklers sticking out of the cake. So in the dusk, here came this cake sparkling and sizzling at us. And I've always thought that was the way to celebrate a birthday. Never forgotten that.
How long did it take you to write this book? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't. Thank you for the question. There's several answers. I announced to the family that I was writing the book in 2011. And I think their reaction was distinctly ho-hum, sort of, well, let's show me the money. And I started writing, I just started writing about the book in discrete pieces, essays, for way back in the early 2000s. The actual serious writing of this book took about 5 years. And what you're seeing here is version 3.2, I think. So yeah, it took a lot of shaking out. As you smile as if you know about these things. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping the next one will be not quite so painful over such a long time. Well, thank you all, and I can still answer more questions or sign or what have you. Thank you so much.